In the heart of Bordeaux's lush vineyards, a grand tasting at Chateau Vigneault turns deadly when vintner Etienne Duval collapses. Poisoned, his cherished Ebony Chalice shattered on the floor. Hercule Poirot, with his razor-sharp mind, unravels a web of envy, greed, and betrayal among a rival vintner, a ruthless businessman, and an ambitious sommelier. As secrets spill like spilled claret, the truth lies in the chalice's fragments. Will Poirot uncover the killer before the vintage of vengeance claims another life? Chapter 1. The Tasting at Chateau Vigneault. The golden light of a late September afternoon bathed the vineyards of Chateau Vigneault, casting long shadows over the orderly rows of vines heavy with fruit. The estate, nestled in the verdant heart of Bordeaux, was a monument to tradition and triumph, its stone facade weathered yet proud. Within its grand tasting room, an air of anticipation hung as thick as the scent of fermenting grapes. Crystal glasses sparkled on damask-clad tables, and bottles of Chateau Vigneault's finest vintages stood in silent promise of delight. The occasion was no ordinary tasting. It was the unveiling of Monsieur Etienne Duval's latest creation, a claret rumored to rival the god's nectar. Hercule Poirot, the meticulous Belgian detective, sat at a small table near the tall windows, his polished shoes catching the light, his mustache immaculate as ever. His presence was a curiosity, for he was not known as a wine aficionado, yet his reputation for discernment in all matters had earned him an invitation. Beside him, Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal companion, adjusted his tie and surveyed the room with a boyish eagerness. "Poirot," Hastings said, leaning forward, his voice low with excitement. "They say this claret is Duval's magnum opus, years in the making, a blend to outshine even his legendary 2008 vintage. Look at this crowd. Half of Bordeaux's elite are here." Poirot's green eyes, sharp and unyielding, flickered over the assembly. "Oui, mon ami, but in such gatherings, one finds not only admiration, but also envy, ambition, and secrets. The wine may be exquisite, but the human heart, it is a more complex vintage." The room buzzed with the murmur of cultured voices. Madame Claire Beaumont, a rival vintner, stood near the fireplace, her angular frame draped in a severe black dress that contrasted with her pale, almost translucent skin. Her eyes, dark and calculating, darted toward Duval as he moved among his guests. Monsieur Lucien Fournier, a portly businessman with a florid complexion and a waistcoat straining at its buttons, laughed loudly at his own jest, though his gaze lingered on Duval with a hint of malice. Mademoiselle Sophie Laurent, the chateau's sommelier, glided through the crowd, her auburn hair catching the candlelight as she ensured each glass was filled with precision. At the room's center, Etienne Duval commanded attention. A man of middle years, with silver threading his dark hair and a face etched with the lines of a life dedicated to his craft, he radiated quiet authority. In his hands, he held the Ebony Chalice, a family heirloom, its dark wood carved with intricate vines, its rim gleaming with a silver inlay. It was a relic of the Duval lineage, used only for the most significant occasions. "Ladies and gentlemen," Duval began, his voice resonant, "tonight we celebrate not merely a wine, but a legacy. This claret, born of our oldest vines, is a testament to patience and passion, to Chateau Vigneault." He raised the chalice, the ruby liquid within catching the light like a jewel. The guests echoed his toast, glasses clinking, but before Duval could drink, his expression changed. His free hand clutched at his collar, his eyes widened in shock, and a strangled gasp escaped his lips. The chalice fell, striking the stone floor with a sharp crack, its fragments scattering like dark petals. Duval staggered, then collapsed, his body crumpling beside the shattered heirloom. A woman screamed. The room erupted into chaos. Glasses dropped, voices rose, and servants rushed forward. A doctor, a guest with a gray beard and a hurried manner, knelt beside Duval, pressing fingers to his wrist. "He's gone," he pronounced grimly. "Dead within moments." Poirot was already on his feet, his small frame moving with surprising agility. He knelt beside the body, his gloved fingers hovering near Duval's lips, where a faint, bitter scent lingered, reminiscent of almonds. His gaze shifted to the broken chalice, its pieces strewn across the floor, the wine pooling like blood. "Hastings," Poirot said softly, "this is no accident. The little gray cells, they are already at work." Hastings, pale and shaken, stared at the scene. "Poison, Poirot? But how? The wine?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his mind's rapid calculations. "Perhaps, mon ami, but the chalice, it speaks to me. We must listen carefully to what it says." As the guests were ushered out and the police summoned, Poirot remained, his eyes fixed on the fragments of ebony and silver, his thoughts weaving a tapestry of suspicion. The tasting at Chateau Vigneault had ended not in triumph, but in tragedy, and Hercule Poirot knew that the truth lay hidden in the shadows of that fateful evening. Chapter 2. The Shattered Chalice. The tasting room of Chateau Vigneault, so recently alive with the clink of glasses and the murmur of refined voices, had transformed into a tableau of shock and disarray. The golden light of the late afternoon had given way to the somber glow of lamps, casting long shadows across the stone floor where Etienne Duval's body lay, covered now by a white cloth. The fragments of the ebony chalice, its dark wood splintered and its silver rim dulled by spilled wine, lay scattered like the remnants of a broken dream. Hercule Poirot stood near the scene, his small, immaculate figure a stark contrast to the chaos around him. His green eyes, sharp as ever, surveyed the room with a quiet intensity, while Captain Arthur Hastings hovered at his side, his face pale with the weight of what they had witnessed. "Poirot," Hastings whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "It's ghastly. Duval was the picture of health not 10 minutes ago. Poison, you said?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a subtle sign of his mind's ceaseless activity. "Oui, mon ami. The scent of almonds, faint but unmistakable, betrays the presence of a poison, likely cyanide or something akin. But the method, Hastings, that is where the mystery begins. The chalice, it is not merely broken. It is a clue, deliberately shattered, perhaps to conceal a truth." The room was now under the control of Inspector Giraud, a wiry, self-assured Frenchman, whose brisk manner and clipped mustache suggested a man more comfortable with action than reflection. Giraud had arrived with a small retinue of gendarmes, who were busy cordoning off the area and ushering the remaining guests into an adjoining parlor. The inspector knelt briefly by Duval's body, his face set in a scowl, before standing and addressing the room. "Poisoned wine, without a doubt," Giraud declared, his tone brooking no argument. "The bottle from which the chalice was filled will be tested immediately. We shall have our culprit by dawn." Poirot's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing at first, merely tilting his head as if to better hear the inspector's words. Hastings, however, could not restrain himself. "But, Inspector, surely it's not so simple. The chalice was handled by several people, wasn't it? And why was it broken? Giraud's lip curled in a faint sneer. Monsieur Poirot's friend, I presume? Leave the deductions to the professionals, monsieur. The bottle is the obvious source. The chalice broke when Duval dropped it in his death throes. Simple Poirot stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking softly on the stone floor. Pardon, Inspector, but simplicity is the enemy of truth in such matters. The chalice, it was not merely dropped. Observe the fragments. He gestured to the scattered pieces, his gloved hand hovering over them without touching. The break is not uniform. Some pieces are crushed, as if struck with force. This was no accident of a falling hand. Giraud's eyes flickered with irritation, but he waved a dismissive hand. You see mysteries where there are none, Poirot. The laboratory will confirm the poison's source. Until then, I suggest you enjoy the chateau's hospitality. Poirot smiled thinly, a gesture that held more steel than warmth. The hospitality, Inspector, is overshadowed by murder. But I shall remain, and my little gray cells, they shall not rest. As Giraud turned to bark orders at his men, Poirot knelt beside the chalice's fragments, his magnifying glass glinting in the lamplight. Hastings crouched beside him, careful not to disturb the scene. What do you see, Poirot? Anything unusual? Poirot's fingers, delicate as a surgeon's, traced the air above a particularly large shard, its silver rim twisted. The chalice, Hastings. It is a work of art, no? Ebony, rare and polished, with silver inlaid to enhance its beauty. Yet it is heavy. Too heavy, perhaps, for a mere drinking vessel. And this residue... He leaned closer, his nose twitching as he inhaled. A faint trace, not of wine, but of something else. We must have it analyzed. Hastings frowned. You think the poison was in the chalice itself, not the wine? Poirot rose, dusting his gloves with a handkerchief. It is a possibility, mon ami. The wine, it was poured for many guests, yet only Duval fell. The chalice, it was his alone, and its destruction. Why? To hide the poison? To obscure a mark? The little gray cells, they demand answers. The two men moved to a quieter corner of the room, where a tall window overlooked the darkening vineyards. The air was cooler now, carrying the faint tang of earth and grape. Hastings, still rattled, glanced back at the covered body. It's a grim business, Poirot. Who could have done this? Duval seemed so respected. Poirot's gaze followed Hastings, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Respect, Hastings, is a mask that many wear. Beneath it lie envy, greed, and betrayal. We must consider those who were closest to the chalice and to Duval. At that moment, a young gendarme approached, his face earnest. Monsieur Poirot, the inspector requests your presence in the parlor. He wishes to question the guests, and he grudgingly admits your insight might be useful. Poirot's lips curved in a faint smile. Grudgingly, you say? Very well. Lead on, jeune homme. The parlor was a study in opulence, its walls lined with portraits of past Duval vintners, their stern faces gazing down on the assembled guests. The atmosphere was heavy with unease. Madame Claire Beaumont sat rigidly in a high-backed chair, her black dress stark against the room's warm tones. Her fingers, adorned with a single emerald ring, tapped restlessly on the armrest. Monsieur Lucien Fournier lounged near a decanter of brandy, his florid face flushed from more than drink, his eyes darting about as if seeking an escape. Mademoiselle Sophie Laurent stood by a sideboard, her auburn hair slightly disheveled, her hands clasped tightly before her. Other guests, minor wine merchants, a local critic, a few aristocrats, whispered among themselves, their faces pale with shock. Giraud stood at the room's center, notebook in hand. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice sharp. "Etienne Duval was murdered by poison, likely administered during the tasting. Each of you was present, and each of you will be questioned. Do not leave the chateau until I permit it." A murmur of protest rose, quickly silenced by Giraud's glare. Poirot, standing near the doorway, observed the room with the precision of a watchmaker. His eyes lingered on each suspect, noting the smallest details. Madame Beaumont's tightly pursed lips, Fournier's sweat-beaded brow, Sophie's nervous glance toward the door. "Inspector," Poirot said, his voice calm but carrying, "might I suggest we begin with those who were closest to Monsieur Duval at the moment of the toast? Mademoiselle Laurent, for instance, poured the wine into the chalice." Sophie's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "I only did my duty, Monsieur Poirot. I poured the claret as Monsieur Duval instructed. I touched nothing else." Giraud nodded, scribbling in his notebook. "And you, Mademoiselle Laurent, did you notice anything unusual about the chalice or the wine?" Sophie hesitated, her fingers twisting together. "The chalice? It was heavy, as always. Monsieur Duval cherished it. The wine smelled as it should, rich, with notes of blackberry and oak. I swear, I did nothing wrong." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Heavy, you say, mademoiselle, and yet you handled it with ease. Tell me, how often did you hold this chalice before tonight?" Sophie flushed. "Only a few times. It was kept locked in a case, brought out only for special occasions. I prepared it this afternoon, polished it myself." Poirot nodded, filing the information away. He turned to Giraud. "And the case, Inspector? Where is it kept?" Giraud frowned. "In Duval's private study, I'm told. Locked, as the mademoiselle says. We'll examine it shortly." Next, Giraud turned to Madame Beaumont, who met his gaze with icy composure. "Madame, you and Duval were rivals. Some say your estate has suffered since his rise. Did you have reason to wish him harm?" Madame Beaumont's laugh was sharp, like breaking glass. "Inspector, if I killed every vintner who outshone me, Bordeaux would be a graveyard. Yes, Duval's success stung, but I am no poisoner. I was across the room when he drank." Poirot interjected, his tone mild. "And yet, madame, your eyes were upon him during the toast. I observed it myself. What held your attention so?" Her lips tightened. "I was curious, Monsieur Poirot. His claret was said to be exceptional. I wished to see his triumph, or his failure." Poirot inclined his head, but his mind was racing. He moved on to Fournier, who was now draining his brandy glass. "Monsieur Fournier, you and Duval were seen in heated discussion 2 days ago, in the village square. What was the nature of your disagreement?" Fournier's jowls quivered. "A trifling matter, Monsieur Poirot. Business, nothing more. Duval refused to sell me a portion of his vineyard. He was stubborn, but I had no cause to kill him." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Money, monsieur, is a motive as old as time. And you, I think, are a man who values it greatly." As Giraud continued his questions, Poirot slipped away, motioning for Hastings to follow. They returned to the tasting room, now quiet save for the soft tread of a gendarme guarding the scene. Poirot approached the chalice fragments once more, his magnifying glass catching the lamplight. "Look, Hastings," he said, pointing to a shard with a jagged edge. "This piece, It is not merely broken. It has been struck, perhaps with a heel or a heavy object. The silver rim is bent inward, as if to conceal something. Hastings squinted. You think someone smashed it deliberately, after Duval fell? Précisément, Poirot said. The poison was in the chalice, I am certain. But the breaking, it was to hide evidence, or perhaps to mislead us. We must learn who had access to the chalice before the tasting, and who was near it when it fell. They moved to the sideboard where the claret bottle stood, its cork still in place. Poirot lifted it carefully, examining the label. Chateau Vigneault, 1920. A fine vintage, untouched by poison, I suspect. The laboratory will confirm, but my little gray cells tell me the bottle is innocent. Hastings rubbed his chin. Then it's the chalice, as you said. But how did the poison get there? Sophie polished it, but surely others could have handled it earlier. Poirot nodded. The study, Hastings. We must see this locked case where the chalice was kept, and we must speak with the servants, those invisible eyes and ears of the chateau. They found the butler, Monsieur Renaud, a stooped man with a lined face, in the corridor. He was wringing his hands, his loyalty to Duval evident in his reddened eyes. Monsieur Poirot, he said, this is a dark day. Monsieur Duval was a good master, a true artist of the vine. Poirot's tone was gentle, but firm. Monsieur Renaud, the chalice, when was it last taken from its case before today? This morning, Renaud replied. Mademoiselle Laurent fetched it for polishing, as Monsieur Duval instructed. It was locked in the study until then. Only Monsieur Duval and I have keys. And where is your key now? Poirot asked. Renaud patted his waistcoat pocket. Here, monsieur. I never let it out of my sight. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And Monsieur Duval's key? Renaud hesitated. On his person, I believe, in his watch chain. Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings. We must examine Monsieur Duval's effects, Hastings. The key, it may tell us much. As they returned to the parlor, Giraud was concluding his initial interviews. The guests were dismissed to their rooms, under strict orders not to leave the chateau. Poirot approached the inspector, who was wiping his brow with a handkerchief. Inspector, Poirot said, I request permission to view Monsieur Duval's study and his personal effects. The chalice's case and his key may hold the key to this mystery. Giraud sighed, clearly exasperated. Very well, Poirot, but do not interfere with my men, and do not expect miracles from your little gray cells. Poirot bowed slightly, his smile unreadable. The miracles, Inspector, are in the details, and Hercule Poirot never overlooks a detail. The study was a small, book-lined room, its air heavy with the scent of leather and old wine. A glass-fronted cabinet stood against one wall, its lock gleaming. Inside, a velvet cushion bore the imprint of the chalice, now empty. Poirot examined the lock, his magnifying glass revealing no signs of tampering. Intact, he murmured. The poisoner, then, had access to the chalice after it was removed, or— He paused, his eyes narrowing. Or they had a key. Hastings, standing by the desk, lifted a small silver chain from a drawer. Poirot, look, Duval's watch chain. The key's here. Poirot took it, turning it over in his gloved hand. Bon. This key, it unlocks more than a cabinet, Hastings. It unlocks the truth. As they left the study, the chateau's clocks struck 9, their chimes echoing through the silent halls. The night was young, but the mystery of the Ebony Chalice was deepening, its shards pointing to a web of motives and opportunities. Poirot's mind, like a finely tuned instrument, was already piecing together the fragments, but the full picture remained elusive, hidden in the shadows of Chateau Vigneault. Chapter 3. The Suspects. The night had settled over Chateau Vigneault like a velvet curtain, its silence broken only by the occasional creak of the ancient timbers and the distant hoot of an owl in the vineyards. Within the chateau, the atmosphere was taut, each guest and servant moving with the wariness of those who knew a murderer walked among them. Hercule Poirot, his small frame erect and his eyes alight with purpose, stood in the library, a room adjacent to the parlor where the guests had been questioned. The library was a sanctuary of polished mahogany and leather-bound volumes, its air heavy with the scent of old paper and wax. A single lamp cast a warm glow over the long table, where Poirot and Captain Arthur Hastings now sat, the latter nursing a glass of water, his earlier enthusiasm for wine quite extinguished. "Poirot," Hastings said, his voice low, "this business grows darker by the hour. Duval, dead in front of us all, and that chalice, smashed to bits. Who could have done it, and why?" Poirot's fingers, delicate and precise, adjusted the alignment of a silver inkstand on the table. "Patience, mon ami. The why, it is always the heart of the matter, but the who must come first. We have 3 souls who stand out in this tragedy, each with a thread of motive that tugs at the little gray cells. Let us examine them, methodically, as Hercule Poirot always does." He produced a small notebook from his pocket, its pages pristine, and began to write with a fountain pen, his script as neat as his mustache. First we have Madame Claire Beaumont, the rival vintner. Her estate, Chateau Beaumont, has dwindled in prestige while Duval's star rose. Envy, Hastings, is a poison as potent as any that killed our host. Hastings nodded, his brow furrowed. "She was cold as ice during the questioning, wasn't she? Barely blinked when Giraud accused her of having a grudge." "Précisément," Poirot said, his pen pausing. "Her composure, it is not innocence, but control. She hides something, but her distance from the chalice during the tasting makes her role less direct. We must learn if she had access to it earlier, or if she influenced another." Poirot turned a page. Next, Monsieur Lucien Fournier, the businessman, a man of wealth and appetite, whose quarrel with Duval over a vineyard purchase was no secret. Money, Hastings, is a motive that burns brightly in such a heart. Hastings leaned forward, his eyes brightening with a thought. "He was sweating buckets in the parlor, Poirot. Nervous, don't you think? And that argument in the village square? People said it was quite heated." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Nervous, oui, but is it guilt or merely the discomfort of a man unused to scrutiny? Fournier is no stranger to ruthlessness, but poison requires finesse, not bluster. We must discover if he knew of the chalice's significance or had the means to tamper with it." Finally, Poirot's pen hovered over the third name. Mademoiselle Sophie Laurent, the sommelier, young, ambitious, and trusted by Duval to handle his precious chalice. She poured the wine, she polished the vessel, and she was closest to it when Duval drank. Her hesitation when questioned, it speaks of a secret. Hastings frowned. She seemed so shaken, Poirot, almost fragile. Could she really have poisoned him? She'd have to be awfully cold-blooded to pour the wine and watch him die. Poirot's eyes gleamed in the lamplight. The heart of a woman, Hastings, can be as complex as the finest vintage. Fragility may be a mask, and ambition a spur. Why did she not drink her own wine that evening? Why did she note the chalice's weight? These are questions that demand answers. The library door creaked open, and Inspector Giraud entered, his face etched with irritation. His coat was rumpled, a sign of the long night ahead, and his eyes flicked to Poirot with barely concealed disdain. "Monsieur Poirot, you are still here, poking about? My men have secured the tasting room, and the bottle is on its way to the laboratory in Bordeaux. We'll have results by morning." Poirot closed his notebook with a deliberate snap. "And the chalice fragments, Inspector? Have they been sent for analysis as well?" Giraud's jaw tightened. "They will be, in due course, but the wine is the key. The poison was in the bottle, I'm certain." Poirot's smile was polite, but edged with steel. "Certainty, Inspector, is a luxury we cannot afford. The chalice, it was the vessel of death. Its destruction was no accident, and its residue will speak louder than any bottle." Giraud waved a hand, dismissing the notion. "You and your theories, Poirot. I deal in facts. The guests are confined to their rooms, and I've sent for Duval's papers, business records, letters, anything that might point to an enemy. If you must meddle, do so quietly." Poirot inclined his head. "Meddle, Inspector? No, I seek only the truth. And the truth, it lies in the details, the lock on the chalice's case, the key on Duval's chain, the hands that touched the ebony before it shattered." Giraud snorted and turned to leave, but Poirot's voice stopped him. "One moment, Inspector. Have you questioned the servants about the chalice's movements today? Monsieur Renaud, the butler, mentioned that only he and Duval had keys to its case, yet Mademoiselle Laurent handled it this afternoon. How did she gain access?" Giraud's eyes narrowed. "Renaud said Duval gave her his key for the polishing. Standard procedure, apparently. You think the girl's involved?" Poirot's expression was inscrutable. "I think, Inspector, that every thread must be followed. Permit me to speak with Monsieur Renaud again, and perhaps the maid who assisted in the tasting room preparations." Giraud sighed, clearly weary of Poirot's persistence. "Very well. Renaud's in the servants' hall, and the maid, Marie, I think, is with him. But don't waste my time with fanciful deductions." As Giraud departed, Hastings leaned closer. "You're on to something, aren't you, Poirot? That business about the key, it's important, isn't it?" Poirot's fingers tapped the table rhythmically. "The key, Hastings, is a symbol of trust. If Duval gave it to Sophie, he trusted her. But trust, it can be betrayed. We must learn who else might have had access to that key, or to the chalice after it was unlocked. They found Monsieur Renaud in the servants' hall, a narrow room lit by a single chandelier. The butler sat at a worn table, his face drawn, a cup of untouched tea before him. Marie, a young maid with wide eyes and a trembling lip, stood nearby, twisting a cloth in her hands. Both looked up as Poirot and Hastings entered, their expressions a mix of grief and apprehension. "Monsieur Renaud," Poirot began, his tone gentle yet commanding. "You have served Monsieur Duval many years, no? Tell me of the Ebony Chalice, its history, its care." Renaud's voice was hoarse with emotion. "It's been in the Duval family for generations, monsieur, crafted in the 17th century. They say from ebony brought from Africa, with silver from a Parisian silversmith. Monsieur Duval used it only for his greatest vintages, a symbol of his legacy. It was kept locked in the study, always." "And today," Poirot pressed, "you say Mademoiselle Laurent took it to polish. Did you see her do so?" Renaud nodded. "Oui, monsieur. Monsieur Duval gave her his key this morning, as he often did for such occasions. I saw her take the chalice to the pantry for polishing. She returned it to the case afterward, and I locked it myself. Poirot's eyes sharpened. And between the polishing and the tasting, who else approached the chalice? Renaud hesitated, his brow furrowing. No one, monsieur. The case was locked until just before the tasting, when Mademoiselle Laurent fetched it again to prepare for the toast. Poirot turned to Marie, who flinched under his gaze. Mademoiselle Marie, you assisted in the tasting room today, oui? Did you see anyone near the chalice before Mademoiselle Laurent brought it out? Marie's voice was barely a whisper. No, monsieur. I was setting out glasses and decanters. Mademoiselle Laurent brought the chalice in just before the guests arrived. She placed it on the sideboard near the claret bottle. Poirot's mustache twitched. And did you notice anything unusual? A stranger near the sideboard, perhaps, or an odd behavior? Marie shook her head, then paused. Well, Monsieur Fournier. He was pacing near the sideboard earlier before the tasting began. He seemed agitated, muttering to himself. But I thought nothing of it. He's always loud and restless. Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings. Merci, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful. As they left the servants' hall, Hastings whispered, Fournier, Poirot. That's something, isn't it? Pacing near the sideboard. Could he have tampered with the chalice? Poirot's expression was thoughtful. It is possible, Hastings, but unlikely. Fournier is a man of blunt actions, not subtle poisons. Yet his presence there is a thread we must pull. And Madame Beaumont, her estate is near, her influence strong. Could she have reached Sophie or another with promises of wealth? They returned to the library, where Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. The chalice, Hastings, it is the heart of this puzzle. Its weight, its destruction, its residue, all point to a deliberate act. But the poisoner needed opportunity, and that opportunity lies in the hours before the tasting. We must reconstruct those hours, minute by minute. Hastings rubbed his eyes, the weight of the evening settling on him. It's a devilish business, Poirot. 3 suspects, all with reasons to hate Duval, but none seem quite the type for poison. Sophie's too young, Beaumont's too proud, Fournier's too blustery. Poirot stopped pacing, his eyes gleaming. And yet, mon ami, one of them, or perhaps more than one, has woven a web of deceit. The chalice was poisoned, the chalice was broken, and the truth lies in the shadows between. Tomorrow, we visit Madame Beaumont's estate, and we speak again with Fournier and Sophie. The little gray cells, they are restless, but they will find the path. As the chateau's clocks chimed midnight, Poirot and Hastings retired to their guest rooms, the weight of the mystery pressing upon them. Outside, the vineyards lay silent under the moon, their secrets as deep as the roots beneath the soil. The Ebony Chalice, shattered and silent, held the key to Etienne Duval's death, and Hercule Poirot was determined to unlock its truth. Chapter 4. The Competitor's Envy. The morning sun rose over the Bordeaux countryside, painting the vineyards of Château Vigneault in hues of amber and rose. The air was crisp, carrying the faint sweetness of dew-kissed grapes, but within the chateau, the shadow of murder lingered. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, his mustache waxed to perfection, stood on the terrace, sipping a tisane as he surveyed the rolling hills. Captain Arthur Hastings joined him, his face still marked by the restless night, his tie slightly askew. Poirot, Hastings said, rubbing his hands against the morning chill. It's hard to believe such a beautiful place could harbor such a crime. Duval's death, it's cast a pall over everything. Poirot's green eyes flickered with a quiet intensity. Beauty, mon ami, often conceals the darkest secrets. Today, we seek the truth behind one such secret, the envy of Madame Claire Beaumont. Her estate lies but a mile hence, and we shall pay her a visit. The little gray cells, they sense a thread of motive in her heart. Hastings nodded, though his expression was skeptical. She's a formidable woman, Poirot, but poison? It seems too underhanded for someone so proud. Poirot's lips curved in a faint smile. Pride, Hastings, can be a mask for desperation. Come, we shall see what lies beneath. They set out on foot, the path winding through rows of vines heavy with fruit. Chateau Beaumont, Madame's estate, was smaller than Vigneault, its stone walls weathered by time, its gardens meticulously tended but lacking the grandeur of its rival. The tasting room, where they were received, was elegant yet austere, with oak tables and shelves lined with bottles bearing the Beaumont crest. A portrait of a stern-faced man, presumably an ancestor, hung above the fireplace, his eyes seeming to follow the visitors. Madame Claire Beaumont greeted them with a cool nod, her black dress as severe as the night before, her emerald ring glinting as she gestured to a pair of chairs. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice sharp as cut glass. "I expected the police, not a detective with a penchant for theatrics. To what do I owe this visit?" Poirot bowed slightly, his manner unruffled. "Madame, Hercule Poirot seeks only the truth, and the truth often lies in conversation. You were at Chateau Vigneault last night, and your rivalry with Monsieur Duval was no secret. Might we discuss your perspective on his success?" Madame Beaumont's lips tightened, but she sat, her posture rigid. "Etienne Duval was இன்று மார்ச் 8, 2025 மாலை 1:48 17 மணி மாலை பகல் 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 மாலை பகல். My father's vineyard was renowned until Duval's innovations, his newfangled methods, his aggressive marketing, drew the critics' praise and the buyers' gold. Yes, I resented him. But murder? I am no barbarian. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he leaned forward, his hands clasped. Resentment, madame, can fester like an untreated wound. Tell me, did you have opportunity to approach the Ebony Chalice before the tasting? Perhaps in the hours when it was prepared? Her dark eyes narrowed, and she poured a glass of her own vintage, a deep crimson wine, with a steady hand. The chalice? That ostentatious relic? I saw it from across the room, nothing more. It was Duval's pride, a symbol of his arrogance. I had no interest in it, nor access to it. I arrived at Vigneault only moments before the tasting began. Hastings, standing near the window, glanced at Poirot, sensing the detective's scrutiny. Poirot's voice remained mild, almost conversational. And yet, madame, your estate is close by. Servants talk, as do villagers. Some say you have been seen at Vigneault in recent weeks, perhaps visiting a certain sommelier? Madame Beaumont's hand paused, the glass halfway to her lips. Gossip, Monsieur Poirot. I visit many estates. It is business, not conspiracy. If you refer to Mademoiselle Laurent, she has sought my advice on vintages, nothing more. My cellars are renowned, even if my name is not. Poirot nodded, his expression inscrutable. Of course, madame. And last night, during the toast, your eyes were fixed upon Duval. Was it his wine you studied, or something else? Her laugh was brittle, like the snap of a dry vine. I watched a rival, Monsieur Poirot. His claret was said to be a masterpiece. I wished to see if it matched the hype, or if it would falter. That is all. Poirot rose, his movements precise. Merci, madame. Your candor is appreciated. We shall not detain you further. As they left the tasting room, the crunch of gravel underfoot, Hastings whispered, She's as cold as ever, Poirot, but she's convincing. No access to the chalice, no clear opportunity. Do you think she's telling the truth? Poirot's mustache twitched. The truth, Hastings, is a vintage that improves with time. Madame Beaumont speaks with conviction, but her envy is a fire that burns deep. She may not have touched the chalice herself, but influence can be wielded from afar. We must learn if her visits to Vigneault were as innocent as she claims. They walked back toward Chateau Vigneault, the sun climbing higher, casting sharp shadows across the vines. Poirot's mind was a whirl of details, the chalice's weight, its deliberate destruction, the faint almond scent of poison. Madame Beaumont's pride and her losses formed a potent motive, but the thread connecting her to the crime remained elusive, like a grape just out of reach. Chapter 5. The Customer's Quarrel. The midday sun hung high over the Bordeaux countryside, its warmth softening the edges of the tragedy that clung to Chateau Vigneault. The village of Saint-Emilion, a short walk from the estate, bustled with its usual rhythm. Vendors hawking bread and cheese, children darting through cobbled streets, and the occasional cart rattling past. Yet the air carried a whisper of unease, as news of Etienne Duval's death spread like a blight through the vines. Hercule Poirot, his black patent shoes gleaming despite the dust of the road, walked purposefully toward the village inn, where he had arranged to meet Monsieur Lucien Fournier. Captain Arthur Hastings trailed beside him, his face a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Poirot, Hastings said, adjusting his hat against the sun. This Fournier fellow seems a bit of a bounder, doesn't he? All that bluster last night, and Marie's comment about him pacing near the sideboard. It's suspicious, surely. Poirot's green eyes flickered with a knowing glint. Suspicious? Oui, mon ami, but suspicion is not proof. Monsieur Fournier is a man of wealth and temper, and his quarrel with Duval suggests a motive. Yet poison requires a subtlety that such a man may lack. We shall see what his words reveal. The inn Le Coq d'Or was a quaint establishment with ivy-clad walls and a low-beamed ceiling. Its tap-room was half full, the murmur of conversation pausing as Poirot and Hastings entered. Fournier sat at a corner table, his stout frame wedged into a chair, a glass of brandy before him. His waistcoat, a garish shade of crimson, strained at its buttons, and his florid cheeks suggested he had not stinted on the inn's offerings. He looked up as Poirot approached, his eyes wary, but his smile forced. Monsieur Poirot, Fournier said, rising clumsily and extending a hand, And your friend, Captain Hastings, yes? Sit, sit. A drink, perhaps? The brandy here is passable, though nothing to Duval's cellars, eh? His laugh was loud, but it rang hollow. Poirot declined the offer with a polite wave, settling into a chair with his usual precision. Monsieur Fournier, we are here not for refreshment, but for clarity. The death of Etienne Duval is a matter most grave, and your name has surfaced in connection with it. Fournier's smile faded, his hand tightening around his glass. Now, see here, Poirot. I'm a businessman, not a murderer. Duval and I had words, yes, but that's no crime. You can't pin this on me just because I raised my voice in the village square. Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his mind's swift calculations. The quarrel, monsieur, was no secret. Witnesses say it was heated, concerning a proposed purchase of Duval's vineyard. Might you share the details? The little gray cells, they thrive on such particulars. Fournier shifted, his chair creaking under his weight. It was business, nothing more. I offered to buy a parcel of his land. Prime vines, mind you, perfect for my export trade. Duval refused, said his legacy wasn't for sale. Got all high and mighty about it, as if my money wasn't good enough. We argued, yes, but it was over days ago. I moved on. Hastings leaned forward, his voice earnest. But you were seen near the sideboard before the tasting, Monsieur Fournier, pacing, muttering to yourself. That's not the behavior of a man who's moved on. Fournier's jowls quivered, a bead of sweat tracing his temple. Pacing, muttering? Good Lord, man. I was nervous about a deal in Paris. I always pace when I'm thinking. The sideboard? I might have passed it, but I didn't touch that blasted chalice. I wouldn't know how to poison a thing if I tried. Poirot's gaze was unyielding, his voice soft but piercing. And yet, monsieur, you were close to the chalice at a critical moment. Did you see anyone else near it? Mademoiselle Laurent, perhaps, or Madame Beaumont? Fournier's eyes darted away, then back. Laurent was fussing about with the wine, as always. That woman's got ambition written all over her. Too sharp for her own good, if you ask me. Beaumont? She was across the room, glaring daggers at Duval. But I didn't see anyone tampering with anything. I was too busy trying to charm a critic into tasting my own stock. Poirot nodded, his fingers steepled. Charm, monsieur, is a useful tool. But tell me, did you know of the chalice's significance to Duval? Its history? Its rarity? Fournier shrugged, draining his brandy. Everyone knew it was his pride and joy. He'd trot it out for big occasions, waving it about like a king's scepter. Gaudy thing, if you ask me. I prefer crystal. Shows the wine's color better. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. A matter of taste, perhaps. And your taste, monsieur, runs to profit. Had Duval accepted your offer, would your fortunes have greatly improved? Fournier's face reddened. Of course they would have. His vines are gold. Everyone knows that. But I didn't kill him over it. There are other vineyards, other deals. I'm not desperate. Poirot rose, his movements deliberate. Desperation, monsieur, wears many faces. Merci for your time. We shall speak again, I think. As they left the inn, the village clock struck 1, its chimes echoing over the rooftops. Hastings, his hands in his pockets, glanced at Poirot. He's a slippery one, Poirot. All that bluster about business, but he was nervous as a cat. And that bit about pacing near the sideboard, do you think he's hiding something? Poirot's eyes narrowed as they walked back toward Chateau Vigneault. Fournier, mon ami, is a man of impulse, not calculation. His quarrel with Duval gives him motive, but his manner suggests fear rather than guilt. The sideboard, however, it is a thread we must follow. Who else was near it? Who saw what? They passed a group of villagers whispering outside a bakery, their eyes following the two men. The news of Duval's death had spread, and with it a tide of speculation. Poirot's mind, however, was focused on the chalice, its weight, its destruction, the faint residue he had detected. Fournier's proximity to the sideboard was a piece of the puzzle, but it did not yet fit. Back at the chateau, they found Inspector Giraud in the tasting room, overseeing the collection of the chalice fragments. His face was set in a scowl, his patience clearly fraying. "Poirot," he said, "the laboratory has begun testing the bottle. No results yet, but I'm certain the poison was in the wine. Your obsession with the chalice is a distraction." Poirot's smile was serene. "A distraction, Inspector? No, it is the heart of the matter. The chalice was poisoned, I am sure, and its breaking was no accident. Have you examined Monsieur Duval's papers yet? His business dealings with Fournier may reveal more than the man admits." Giraud grunted. "We're going through them now. Contracts, letters, accounts. Duval was meticulous. If Fournier had a grudge worth killing over, we'll find it." Poirot nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. "And Mademoiselle Laurent? Have you questioned her further about her movements yesterday?" Giraud's eyes narrowed. "She's sticking to her story, polished the chalice, locked it back in the case, fetched it for the tasting. Nothing out of the ordinary. You think she's lying?" Poirot's expression was unreadable. "I think, Inspector, that the truth is like a fine wine. It requires time to breathe. Permit me to speak with her again, and perhaps we shall uncork a revelation." As Giraud returned to his work, Poirot led Hastings to the terrace, where the vineyards stretched into the distance, their orderly rows a stark contrast to the chaos within. "Fournier's motive is clear," Poirot said, "but his opportunity is less so. The chalice was locked away until Sophie handled it. We must learn if Fournier or another could have reached it before the fatal toast." Hastings sighed, his shoulders slumping. "It's a tangled mess, Poirot. Fournier, Beaumont, Laurent, each has a reason, but none seem quite right for murder. What's next?" Poirot's gaze was distant, fixed on the horizon. "Next, mon ami, we speak with Mademoiselle Laurent. Her hands held the chalice, her eyes saw its secrets, the little gray cells. They whisper that she knows more than she tells." The sun climbed higher, bathing the chateau in light, but the shadow of Etienne Duval's death lingered, and the truth remained as elusive as the scent of a forgotten vintage. Chapter 6. The Sommelier's Secret. The afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Chateau Vigneault, casting a soft glow over the stone floors of the wine cellar, where barrels of aging vintages stood in silent rows. The air was cool and heavy with the scent of oak and fermenting grapes, a sanctuary of tradition now tainted by the specter of murder. Hercule Poirot, his black suit pristine despite the dust of the day, descended the spiral staircase with Captain Arthur Hastings at his side. Hastings's face bore the strain of the investigation, his earlier enthusiasm replaced by a growing unease. "Poirot," Hastings said, his voice echoing faintly in the cavernous cellar. "This place gives me the shivers. All these barrels, all this quiet. It's like a tomb. Do you really think Mademoiselle Laurent will tell us anything new? She seemed so rattled last night." Poirot's green eyes gleamed in the dim light, his mustache perfectly symmetrical. The rattled mind, mon ami, often betrays its secrets in its tremors. Mademoiselle Sophie Laurent is young, ambitious, and trusted by Duval to handle his cherished chalice. Yet her hesitation, her avoidance of her own glass during the tasting, these are threads that tug at the little gray cells. We must pull gently, but firmly. They found Sophie Laurent at the far end of the cellar, arranging bottles on a rack with a precision that belied her nervous demeanor. Her auburn hair was pinned neatly, but a stray lock betrayed her agitation, and her hands moved with a slight tremor as she turned to face them. Her eyes, a striking hazel, widened at the sight of Poirot, and she set down a bottle with care. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," she said, her voice soft but strained. I expected Inspector Giraud. Have you more questions?" Poirot bowed slightly, his manner courteous yet piercing. "Mademoiselle, Hercule Poirot seeks not to accuse, but to understand. You were closest to Monsieur Duval at the moment of his death, pouring the wine into the Ebony Chalice. Your role in this tragedy is central, and I wish to hear your account once more, with all the clarity you can muster." Sophie's fingers twisted together, her gaze flickering toward the stone floor. "I've told the inspector everything, monsieur. I polished the chalice yesterday morning, as Monsieur Duval instructed. I took it from its case in his study, cleaned it in the pantry, and returned it to the case. Later, just before the tasting, I fetched it again and filled it with the claret. I did nothing wrong." Poirot's eyes never left her face, noting the quickened pulse at her throat. "The chalice, mademoiselle, you said it was heavy. Heavier than you expected, perhaps? A curious observation for one accustomed to handling it." Sophie flushed, her hands smoothing her apron. "It was a figure of speech, monsieur. The chalice is ebony and silver, naturally heavy. I meant only that it felt substantial in my hands, as it always did." Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his mind's relentless probing. "And yet, mademoiselle, you are a sommelier of skill. You know the weight of every glass, every decanter. A change, however slight, would not escape you. Tell me, did you notice anything else? Perhaps a residue, a scent, a mark on the chalice?" Her eyes darted to the side, then back, and she shook her head. "No, monsieur. It was clean, polished to a shine. I noticed nothing unusual." Hastings, standing by a barrel, interjected with his usual earnestness. "But you didn't drink from your own glass last night, Mademoiselle Laurent. Everyone else toasted, but you stood there, holding yours. Why was that?" Sophie's cheeks paled, and she clasped her hands tightly. I was busy, Captain. A sommelier's work does not end with pouring. I was watching the guests, ensuring their glasses were filled, their needs met. I had no time to drink." Poirot's smile was gentle but unyielding. "No time, mademoiselle? Or perhaps no inclination? The wine was from the same bottle as Duval's, yet you alone abstained. The little gray cells, they wonder if you knew something others did not." Sophie's lips parted, a protest forming, but she hesitated, her eyes brimming with sudden tears. "You think I poisoned him? Monsieur Duval was kind to me, gave me a chance when others wouldn't. I would never harm him." Poirot raised a hand, his voice soothing yet firm. "Calm yourself, mademoiselle. I accuse no one. Yet. But truth, it is like a fine wine. It must be coaxed from the depths. Tell me, have you visited Madame Beaumont's estate recently? There is talk in the village of such a meeting." Sophie's breath caught, and she turned away. pretending to adjust a bottle on the rack. Yes, I visited Chateau Beaumont last week. Madame Beaumont is a respected vintner. I sought her advice on a blend I'm developing. It was professional, nothing more. Poirot's eyes narrowed, but his tone remained even. Professional, oui. And yet, mademoiselle, such visits are not common between rivals' estates. Did Madame Beaumont speak of Monsieur Duval? Of his chalice, perhaps? Sophie shook her head, her voice barely audible. She spoke of wine, of technique. Nothing of Monsieur Duval or his chalice, I swear it. Poirot nodded, but his mind was racing, piecing together the fragments of her words, her glances, her hesitations. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur. Mademoiselle, if there is something you conceal, now is the time to speak. A man is dead, and the truth will not remain buried. Trust Hercule Poirot, and let the little gray cells guide us to justice. Sophie's eyes met his, wide and fearful, but she shook her head again. I've told you all I know, monsieur. Please, leave me to my work. Poirot bowed, his expression unreadable. Very well, mademoiselle, but the truth, it has a way of rising to the surface. We shall speak again. As they ascended the staircase to the main hall, Hastings whispered, She's hiding something, Poirot. Did you see her hands shake? And that business about not drinking? It's downright odd. Poirot's fingers tapped his walking stick rhythmically. Odd, oui, and revealing. Mademoiselle Laurent is a woman of talent, but also of ambition. Her visit to Madame Beaumont, her avoidance of the wine. These are not the actions of an innocent, yet her fear, it is genuine. Is it fear of discovery or of something else? They emerged into the hall, where Inspector Giraud was conferring with a gendarme. His face was flushed with impatience, and he turned as Poirot approached. Poirot, have you finished playing detective with the sommelier? My men have found something in Duval's papers, a letter from Fournier, threatening legal action over their dispute. It's damning, I'd say. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Damning, perhaps, but not conclusive. Monsieur Fournier's threats are loud, but poison is silent. Have you the results from the laboratory yet, Inspector? Giraud shook his head. Not yet. The bottle and the chalice fragments are being tested, but I'm telling you, the wine's the key. You're wasting time on that broken cup. Poirot's smile was serene. The chalice, Inspector, is the heart of this mystery. Its weight, its destruction, its secrets, they point to a deliberate act. Mademoiselle Laurent handled it last, and her story, it has cracks. We must learn who else touched it, and when. Giraud snorted, but his tone softened slightly. You're persistent, I'll give you that. I'm sending men to search the servants' quarters and the grounds. If there's poison hidden here, we'll find it. Poirot inclined his head. A wise course, Inspector, and permit me to examine the chalice's case again. The lock, the key, they may yet speak. As Giraud strode off, Hastings looked at Poirot, his brow furrowed. Sophie's our best lead, isn't she? But she's so young, so delicate. Could she really have done it? Poirot's gaze was distant, fixed on the cellar door they had just left. Delicacy, Hastings, can conceal strength, and youth can mask cunning. Mademoiselle Laurent knows more than she says, and her secret is a thread we must unravel. Tomorrow we return to the study, and we seek the truth in the shadows of the chalice. The chateau's clocks struck 3, their chimes resonating through the silent halls. Outside, The vineyards lay serene under the afternoon sun, but within, the mystery of Etienne Duval's death deepened, its truth hidden in the heart of a young sommelier who trembled under Poirot's gaze. Chapter 7. The Fragments of Truth. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the tasting room of Chateau Vigneault, where the air still held a faint trace of spilled wine and tragedy. The once vibrant space, with its polished oak tables and crystal decanters, now felt like a stage abandoned after a grim performance. Hercule Poirot stood near the spot where Etienne Duval had fallen, his small frame dwarfed by the grandeur of the room, yet his presence commanding. His green eyes, sharp as cut emeralds, fixed on the stone floor, where the fragments of the Ebony Chalice had been carefully collected by Inspector Giraud's men. Only a faint stain of claret remained, a silent witness to the murder. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing by a tall window, shifted uneasily, his hands thrust into his pockets. "Poirot," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "This case is like trying to bottle smoke. We've spoken to Beaumont, Fournier, and Laurent, and each has a motive, but none seem quite the type for poison. And that chalice? Why smash it? It's driving me mad." Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his mind's relentless activity. "Patience, mon ami. The chalice, it is the key to this puzzle, and its fragments, they speak to Hercule Poirot. The breaking was no accident, but a deliberate act, meant to conceal or confuse. We must listen to what these shards reveal." He knelt beside the sideboard where the chalice had been placed before the fatal toast, his gloved hands hovering over the surface. A small evidence bag, left by Giraud's team, contained the largest fragments of the chalice, carefully labeled. Poirot requested the bag from a nearby gendarme, who handed it over with a skeptical glance. With his magnifying glass, Poirot examined a jagged piece of ebony, its silver rim bent inward as if struck by force. "Regardez, Hastings," Poirot said, his voice low with intensity. "This fragment, it is not merely broken. The silver is crushed, as if by a heel or a heavy object. And here," he tilted the shard, catching the light. "A faint residue, almost invisible, clings to the interior. Not wine, none, but something else." Hastings peered over his shoulder, squinting. "Poison, you think? But how could it be applied so precisely? And why break the chalice afterward?" Poirot rose, his movements precise. "The poison, it was in the chalice, not the wine. The bottle served many guests, yet only Duval died. The chalice, his personal vessel, was the perfect instrument. Its destruction, I believe, was to hide the residue, or to make us think the poison came from elsewhere. A clever ruse, but the little gray cells, they are not so easily deceived." At that moment, Inspector Giraud strode into the room, his face set in a scowl. His coat was dusted with the day's work, and his eyes betrayed a flicker of exasperation as they landed on Poirot. "Still fussing over that broken cup, Poirot? The laboratory has confirmed traces of cyanide in the chalice fragments, but the bottle is clean, as I suspected it might be. Your theory holds water, for now." Poirot's smile was serene, but his eyes gleamed with triumph. "Cyanide, Inspector? Bon. This confirms the chalice as the weapon. But tell me, have your men found any trace of the poison elsewhere in the chateau? A vial, perhaps, or a container?" Giraud shook his head. "Not yet. We've searched the servants' quarters, the pantry, even the cellars. Nothing. Whoever did this was careful. But I'm leaning toward Fournier. His threats in that letter we found are too damning to ignore." Poirot's fingers tapped his walking stick rhythmically. Fournier's threats. They are loud, Inspector, but cyanide is silent. His motive is strong, but his opportunity is weak. The chalice was locked in its case until Mademoiselle Laurent fetched it. We must know who had access in those critical hours. Giraud's lip curled. You're still on about the sommelier? She's a slip of a girl, Poirot. Ambitious, maybe, but a murderer? I doubt it. My money's on Fournier or that Beaumont woman. She's got the cunning for it. Poirot inclined his head, his expression unreadable. Cunning, oui, but murder requires more than motive. It requires opportunity and means. Permit me to examine the chalice's case once more, Inspector. The lock, the key, they may yet speak. Giraud sighed, waving a hand. Do as you like, but don't disturb my men. I'm off to question the groundskeeper. He saw Fournier near the chateau yesterday morning, acting shifty. As Giraud departed, Poirot led Hastings to Duval's study, a small room lined with leather-bound ledgers and the faint scent of old wine. The glass-fronted cabinet stood against one wall, its velvet cushion empty, the imprint of the chalice a ghostly reminder of its absence. Poirot examined the lock with his magnifying glass, his brow furrowing slightly. No scratches, no signs of tampering, he murmured. The case was opened with a key, either Duval's or Renaud's. Yet Mademoiselle Laurent had access to polish it. We must confirm the timeline of her actions. Hastings, standing by the desk, lifted a small ledger. Look here, Poirot. Duval's appointment book. Yesterday morning, he met with Sophie at 9 to discuss the tasting. No mention of anyone else handling the chalice. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Bon, Hastings. This narrows the window. Sophie took the chalice to the pantry, polished it, and returned it to the case. But between its return and the tasting, who else could have approached it? We must speak with the maid, Marie, again. She was in the tasting room all afternoon. They found Marie in the servants' hall, folding linens with a nervous energy. Her wide eyes darted to Poirot as he entered, her hands pausing mid-fold. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice trembling. Have you found who did it? Poor Monsieur Duval. Poirot's tone was gentle but firm. Not yet, mademoiselle, but the truth draws near. You were in the tasting room yesterday afternoon, preparing for the event. Tell me, did anyone approach the sideboard where the chalice was placed after Mademoiselle Laurent brought it out? Marie hesitated, her fingers twisting the cloth. I was busy with the glasses, monsieur. Mademoiselle Laurent set the chalice on the sideboard, and I saw her pour the wine just before the guests arrived. But she paused, her cheeks flushing. Speak, mademoiselle, Poirot urged, his voice soft as velvet. The smallest detail may unlock the mystery. Marie swallowed. Monsieur, Fournier, he was there earlier, as I told you. But also, Madame Beaumont's carriage was at the gate that afternoon. I saw it from the window. She didn't come inside, but I thought it odd. She rarely visits Vigneault. Poirot's mustache twitched, his eyes alight. Madame Beaumont's carriage, you say? Most interesting. And did you see Mademoiselle Laurent speak with anyone unusual that day? Marie shook her head. No, monsieur. She was in and out of the cellar, then the tasting room. She seemed distracted, though. Kept looking at the clock as if she was waiting for something. Poirot nodded, filing the detail away. Merci, Mademoiselle Marie. You have been most helpful. As they left the servants' hall, Hastings whispered, Beaumont's carriage, Poirot. That's a bombshell. Could she have met Sophie outside? Planted the poison somehow? Poirot's gaze was distant, his mind weaving the threads together. It is possible, Hastings. Madame Beaumont's envy, Sophie's ambition, Fournier's greed, these are the ingredients of a deadly vintage. But the chalice, it binds them all. Its residue, its weight, its destruction. These are the clues that will lead us to the truth. They returned to the tasting room, where the last rays of sunlight painted the walls in gold. Poirot paused by the sideboard, his fingers tracing the air above the spot where the chalice had stood. The poison was applied with precision, Hastings. Not a drop spilled, not a scent betrayed it until Duval drank. This was no amateur's work. We must await the laboratory's full report, but I suspect the cyanide was coated inside the chalice, perhaps in a thin layer, activated by the wine. Hastings rubbed his chin, his brow furrowed. But who? Poirot? Sophie's the obvious choice. She handled the chalice. But Beaumont's carriage, Fournier's pacing, it's all so tangled. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Tangled, oui, but every knot can be undone. Tomorrow we press Mademoiselle Laurent further, and we seek evidence of Madame Beaumont's presence. The little gray cells, they are restless, but they will not fail. As the chateau's clocks chimed 6, the room grew dim, the shadows lengthening. The fragments of the Ebony Chalice, now in the hands of the laboratory, held the truth of Etienne Duval's death, and Hercule Poirot was determined to piece them together, one shard at a time. Chapter 8. A Web of Deceit. The evening had draped Chateau Vigneault in a hush, the vineyards outside cloaked in twilight's soft embrace. Within the grand tasting room, where the air still carried the faint tang of spilled claret, Hercule Poirot had summoned the principal figures of the tragedy for a gathering. The room, its high ceilings and crystal chandeliers, now dimmed by the somber mood, was arranged with chairs in a semicircle, facing the sideboard where the ebony chalice had stood before its fatal use. Poirot stood at the center, his small stature commanding the space with an authority that belied his size. His black suit was immaculate, his mustache a perfect crescent, and his green eyes gleamed with the intensity of a man who saw truths others missed. Captain Arthur Hastings sat near the edge of the group, his notebook open, his face a mixture of anticipation and unease. "Poirot," he whispered as the others took their seats, "this feels like one of your grand reveals, but are you sure? We've no solid proof yet, have we?" Poirot's lips curved in a faint, enigmatic smile. "Proof, mon ami, is like a grape on the vine. It ripens with care. Tonight, we do not accuse, but we weave the threads together. The little gray cells, they have been busy, and they sense the pattern of this crime." The suspects entered, each with a demeanor shaped by the weight of scrutiny. Madame Claire Beaumont, her black dress as severe as ever, sat with her back straight, her dark eyes cold and unyielding. Monsieur Lucien Fournier, his crimson waistcoat straining, slumped in his chair, a glass of brandy clutched in his hand, his florid face betraying a nervous energy. Mademoiselle Sophie Laurent, her auburn hair neatly pinned but her hands trembling slightly, took a seat near the sideboard, her hazel eyes avoiding Poirot's gaze. Inspector Giraud stood by the door, his arms crossed, his scowl deepening as he watched Poirot take charge. A few servants, including Monsieur Renaud and Marie, lingered at the edges, their presence required by Poirot's insistence. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and resonant, "we are gathered to unravel the tragedy of Etienne Duval's death, a man of genius, struck down by poison in the very moment of his triumph, his ebony chalice shattered upon the floor. This was no accident, but a murder most calculated. The chalice, it was the vessel of death, coated with cyanide, a poison swift and silent. But who wielded this weapon, and why? The room stirred, whispers rippling among the guests. Madame Beaumont's lips tightened. Fournier's glass paused halfway to his mouth, and Sophie's hands clasped tighter in her lap. Giraud cleared his throat, but Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. "Let us consider the facts," Poirot continued, pacing slowly before the group, his hands clasped behind his back. The chalice was kept locked in a case in Monsieur Duval's study, accessible only by 2 keys, one held by Duval, the other by Monsieur Renaud. Yesterday morning, Mademoiselle Laurent took the chalice to polish, using Duval's key. She returned it to the case, which was locked until just before the tasting, when she fetched it again. The poison, we know, was in the chalice, not the wine, for the bottle served many, yet only Duval died. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "Madame Beaumont, your rivalry with Duval was no secret. Your estate has suffered while his flourished. Envy, it is a powerful motive, non?" Madame Beaumont's voice was sharp as a blade. "I've said it before, Monsieur Poirot. Resentment is not murder. I was nowhere near the chalice. I arrived at the tasting moments before it began." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Oui, madame, but your carriage was seen at Vigneault's gate yesterday afternoon, hours before the tasting. A curious visit for one who rarely comes here." Her eyes flashed, but she maintained her composure. "My carriage? Perhaps my driver paused there. I often tour the vineyards. It proves nothing." Poirot turned to Fournier, whose sweat-beaded brow glistened in the lamplight. "Monsieur Fournier, your quarrel with Duval over his refusal to sell his vineyard was heated. You were seen pacing near the sideboard where the chalice rested, moments before the toast. A man of your ambition might see murder as a means to an end." Fournier's jowls quivered as he set down his glass with a clink. "This is absurd, Poirot. Yes, I wanted his land, but I'm no poisoner. I was pacing because I was anxious about a deal, nothing more. I didn't touch that wretched chalice." Poirot's gaze shifted to Sophie, who shrank slightly under its weight. "Mademoiselle Laurent, you are the key to this mystery. You polished the chalice, you poured the wine, you stood closest when Duval drank. You noted its weight, yet you did not drink from your own glass. Why?" Sophie's voice trembled, her eyes brimming with tears. "I've told you, Monsieur Poirot, I was busy serving. I didn't poison him. I cared for Monsieur Duval. He gave me my start." Poirot's tone softened, but his eyes were relentless. "Caring, mademoiselle, does not preclude betrayal. You visited Madame Beaumont's estate last week, a meeting you described as professional. Yet the village whispers of more frequent visits, of late-night talks. What did Madame Beaumont offer you?" Sophie's face paled, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. "Nothing. She advised me on a blend, that's all. I swear it." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Giraud stepped forward, his voice gruff. "Poirot, enough of this theater. If you've evidence, present it. Otherwise, let my men do their work." Poirot's smile was serene, but his words carried weight. "Evidence, Inspector, is in the details. The chalice was heavy, as Mademoiselle Laurent noted, a weight not from its wood or silver, but from a coating of cyanide. Applied with care. Its destruction, deliberate, was to hide this residue. But who had the opportunity? Madame Beaumont, your carriage places you near Vigneault, perhaps influencing another. Monsieur Fournier, your presence by the sideboard raises questions, though your bluster lacks the subtlety of poison. Mademoiselle Laurent, your hands held the chalice, your eyes saw its secrets. He paused, his gaze locking on Sophie. And you, mademoiselle, were seen leaving Chateau Beaumont late last night, after Duval's death. A curious time for a professional visit, non? Sophie gasped, her hands flying to her face. I went to ask Madame Beaumont about a rumor, nothing more. I was frightened. I didn't know what to do. Madame Beaumont stood, her voice icy. This is outrageous, Poirot. You accuse without proof. I was in my bed last night, not receiving visitors. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The truth, mesdames, will not remain hidden. The chalice was poisoned. The chalice was broken, and the one who broke it sought to conceal their guilt. We are close, very close, to the heart of this web of deceit. Hastings leaned forward, his voice a whisper. Poirot, you're pushing them hard. Do you know who did it? Poirot's reply was barely audible. The little gray cells. They see the pattern, Hastings. But one more thread must be pulled. Tomorrow, we shall have our answer. As the group dispersed, their faces etched with fear and suspicion, the chateau's clocks struck 8, their chimes echoing through the silent halls. The web of deceit was tightening, and Hercule Poirot stood at its center, ready to unravel the final strands. Chapter 9. The Bribe Revealed. The morning mist clung to the vineyards of Chateau Vigneault, veiling the rolling hills in a silvery haze that softened the edges of the tragedy within. The chateau itself stood resolute, its stone walls bathed in the pale light of dawn, but the air inside was heavy with suspicion and unspoken truths. Hercule Poirot, his black suit as pristine as ever, his mustache a perfect arc, stood in the library, where the scent of old leather and polished wood mingled with the tension of the ongoing investigation. Captain Arthur Hastings paced near a tall bookshelf, his face etched with the restless energy of a man grappling with a puzzle that refused to resolve. Poirot, Hastings said, pausing to adjust his tie. Last night was quite the performance. You had them all on edge, Beaumont, Fournier, Laurent. But we're no closer to proof, are we? Sophie's visit to Beaumont's estate after the murder, that's damning, but it's not enough, is it? Poirot's green eyes gleamed, his fingers delicately aligning a stray volume on the table. Proof, mon ami, is like the sediment in a fine wine. It settles with time. Last night we stirred the waters, and now the truth begins to rise. Mademoiselle Laurent's fear, Madame Beaumont's denial, Monsieur Fournier's bluster. These are the threads of a tapestry, and today we shall weave them together. The library door opened, and Inspector Giraud entered, his face a mask of impatience. His coat was rumpled, his eyes shadowed from a night of relentless work. Poirot, he said, his tone clipped, the laboratory results are in. The chalice fragments show a concentrated layer of cyanide, applied as a thin coating inside the bowl. The wine activated it, just as you suspected. But we've found no trace of the poison. Elsewhere, no vials, no containers. Whoever did this was meticulous. Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of quiet triumph. Meticulous, oui, Inspector. This was no crime of passion, but one of calculation. The chalice was chosen for its intimacy. Only Duval drank from it. Its destruction was to hide the cyanide's residue, but the little gray cells, they saw through the ruse. Giraud's scowl deepened. Fine, you were right about the chalice, But who? Fournier's threats are on paper. Beaumont's got motive up to her ears. And Laurent? Well, she's the one who handled the thing. I'm ready to bring her in for questioning again. Poirot raised a hand, his voice calm but commanding. Patience, Inspector. Mademoiselle Laurent is a key, but not the only one. Permit me to speak with her once more and to examine the grounds where Madame Beaumont's carriage was seen. The truth, it is close, but it requires one final nudge. Giraud sighed, waving a dismissive hand. Do what you must, Poirot, but don't waste my time. I've got men searching the stables and the servants' quarters again. If there's a clue, we'll find it. As Giraud departed, Poirot turned to Hastings. Come, mon ami, we shall visit Mademoiselle Laurent in the cellar, where she feels most at ease. The truth, it hides in her fear, and we must coax it forth. They descended to the wine cellar, its cool, shadowed expanse a stark contrast to the sunlit vineyards above. The air was thick with the scent of oak and fermenting grapes, and the silence was broken only by the soft clink of bottles as Sophie Laurent worked at a rack, her movements precise but tinged with nervous energy. Her auburn hair was pinned tightly, but her hazel eyes betrayed a flicker of panic as she saw Poirot and Hastings approach. Monsieur Poirot, she said, setting down a bottle with care. I thought I'd answered all your questions. What more do you want from me? Poirot's smile was gentle, but his gaze was unrelenting. Mademoiselle, Hercule Poirot seeks only the truth, and the truth is a burden you carry. Your visit to Chateau Beaumont last night, after Monsieur Duval's death, it was not for advice on a vintage, was it? You went to confront Madame Beaumont, or perhaps to seek her protection. Sophie's hands trembled, and she stepped back, her back brushing against a barrel. I told you, I went to ask about a rumor. I was frightened. Everyone was talking about poison, about murder. I thought Madame Beaumont might know something, that's all. Poirot's voice dropped to a soft murmur, almost hypnotic. And what did Madame Beaumont say, mademoiselle? Did she offer you comfort, or something more? Substantial? A promise, perhaps, to secure your future? Sophie's eyes widened, tears welling. You're twisting my words, Monsieur Poirot. I didn't do anything wrong. I polished the chalice. I poured the wine. You broke the chalice, Poirot interrupted, his voice sharp now, cutting through her protest. After Duval fell, you stepped forward, and with a swift motion, you crushed the chalice under your heel. Why, mademoiselle? To hide the cyanide you had applied? Sophie gasped, her hands flying to her face. No, I didn't poison him. I broke the chalice because I panicked. It fell, and I thought it might look like an accident, that it would protect the chateau's reputation. I didn't know about the poison. Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mind racing. Panic, mademoiselle, or calculation? You visited Madame Beaumont last week, and again last night. She is a woman of means, of influence. Did she offer you money, a position, to betray Monsieur Duval? Sophie's knees buckled, and she sank onto a stool, her sobs echoing in the cellar. She offered me a place at her estate, she whispered. A better salary, a chance to make my own blends. She said Duval was holding me back, that he'd never let me shine. But I didn't agree to anything. I only went last night to ask if she'd heard anything about the poison, to see if she suspected me. Hastings, standing by a barrel, exchanged a glance with Poirot. Good Lord, Poirot. A bribe? That's it, isn't it? Beaumont put her up to it. Poirot's expression remained inscrutable. A bribe? Oui, but the truth is not yet complete. Mademoiselle Laurent, You coated the chalice with cyanide, supplied by Madame Beaumont, did you not? And when Duval fell, you broke the chalice to conceal your act, hoping to make it seem an accident. Sophie's sobs grew louder, her voice breaking. No, I didn't poison it. Yes, I broke the chalice, but only because I was scared. I didn't know it was poisoned until he fell. I swear it, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot's gaze softened, but his mind was relentless. Then why, mademoiselle, did you not drink from your own glass? You knew, did you not, that the chalice held death? Sophie shook her head frantically. I didn't know. I was just too busy, too nervous. I couldn't think straight. Poirot stepped closer, his voice a velvet blade. Mademoiselle, the truth is near. Madame Beaumont's offer was tempting, was it not? A fortune to secure your future, a chance to rise above your station. You took her poison, you applied it to the chalice, and you broke it to hide your guilt. But the little gray cells, they see through the panic, through the tears. Sophie collapsed, her sobs racking her frame. I didn't want to do it. She pressured me, said it was the only way. She gave me the powder, told me how to use it. I thought I could back out, but then it was too late. Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet triumph. Merci, mademoiselle. The truth, it is painful, but it is free. You shall tell this to Inspector Giraud, and justice will follow. As Hastings helped Sophie to her feet, her sobs echoing in the cellar, Poirot turned to the staircase, his mind already piecing together the final threads. Madame Beaumont's envy had woven a deadly web, and Sophie, caught in its strands, had been the instrument of murder. The Ebony Chalice, shattered and poisoned, had revealed its secrets, and Hercule Poirot stood poised to bring the truth to light. Chapter 10. The Confession. The twilight descended over Chateau Vigneault, casting a somber veil across the vineyards, gaunt vineyards, and the grand stone facade of the chateau. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of earth and grapes, but within the walls of the chateau, the atmosphere was charged with the weight of revelation. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand parlor, its high ceilings and gilded portraits now seeming to loom over the small gathering he had assembled. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, casting flickering shadows on the faces of those present, each marked by the strain of the unfolding truth. Captain Arthur Hastings stood by Poirot's side, his face a mixture of awe and apprehension, his notebook forgotten in his hand. "Poirot," he whispered, "you've done it again. Sophie's confession, it's staggering. But Madame Beaumont, she's as cold as ice. Will she crack?" Poirot's green eyes gleamed, his mustache a perfect crescent in the firelight. "The ice, mon ami, it cracks under pressure. Tonight, we shall see the full measure of this tragedy." Inspector Giraud stood near the door, his arms crossed, his scowl softened by a grudging respect. Beside him, Mademoiselle Sophie Laurent sat in a low chair, her auburn hair disheveled, her hazel eyes red-rimmed from tears. Her confession in the cellar had been a torrent of guilt and fear, and now she sat, fragile and broken, under the weight of her admission. Madame Claire Beaumont stood by a tall window, her black dress a stark silhouette against the fading light, her face an unreadable mask. Monsieur Lucien Fournier, his florid cheeks pale for once, sat heavily in an armchair, his brandy glass untouched. Monsieur Renaud, the butler, and Marie, the maid, lingered at the edges, their presence a silent testament to the chateau's shaken order. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and commanding, We stand at the precipice of truth. Etienne Duval was murdered by cyanide, administered through the Ebony Chalice, his cherished heirloom. The chalice was coated with the poison, and its deliberate destruction was meant to conceal the crime. Mademoiselle Laurent has confessed to breaking the chalice and to a role in its poisoning, driven by the promise of a brighter future. Sophie's head bowed, a soft sob escaping her lips. Madame Beaumont's eyes narrowed, but she remained silent, her hands clasped tightly before her. Fournier shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting to the door. Poirot turned to Sophie, his tone gentle yet unrelenting. Mademoiselle Laurent, you have admitted that Madame Beaumont offered you a fortune to poison the chalice. You applied the cyanide supplied by her and broke the chalice to hide your guilt. But the truth, it cannot be shattered like wood and silver. Tell us in your own words how this came to pass. Sophie's voice was barely a whisper, trembling with anguish. It was Madame Beaumont. She came to me last week at her estate. She said Monsieur Duval was stifling my talent, that I'd never rise under him. She offered me a position at Chateau Beaumont with a salary I could never dream of. And she gave me a small vial of powder, said it would make him ill, just enough to force him to sell. I didn't know it was cyanide. I swear, I thought it was harmless. Madame Beaumont's voice cut through the room like a whip. This is preposterous. The girl is delusional, grasping at lies to save herself. I offered her no such thing. I was in my bed last night, as I told you, Poirot. Poirot's gaze shifted to her, his eyes piercing. Madame, your carriage was seen at Vigneault's gate yesterday afternoon, and Mademoiselle Laurent was seen leaving your estate late last night. Your denials, they are as fragile as glass. You supplied the cyanide, you manipulated a young woman's ambition, and you sought to destroy your rival. Madame Beaumont's lips tightened, her emerald ring glinting as her hand clenched. You have no proof, Poirot. A carriage? A visit? These are not evidence. The girl acted alone, if she acted at all. Giraud stepped forward, his voice gruff. We're searching your estate now, Madame Beaumont. If there's a trace of cyanide, we'll find it. And your financial records, any large payments to Mademoiselle Laurent will be hard to explain. Fournier, his voice hoarse, spoke up. This is madness. I had nothing to do with this. My quarrel with Duval was business, not murder. Poirot nodded, his gaze softening slightly. Monsieur Fournier, your motives were clear, but your methods are not those of poison. Your role in this tragedy, it is peripheral. The heart of it lies with Madame Beaumont and Mademoiselle Laurent. Sophie's sobs grew louder, her words spilling out. I didn't mean for him to die. Madame Beaumont said it would only make him ill, that he'd recover. I coated the chalice in the pantry, just a thin layer, as she instructed. When he fell, I panicked. I stomped on the chalice to make it look like an accident. I thought it would protect us all. Madame Beaumont's face was ashen, but her voice remained steady. The girl lies, Poirot. She's desperate to shift the blame. I am innocent. Poirot's smile was serene, but his eyes were steel. Innocence, madame, does not survive the scrutiny of the little gray cells. The cyanide was yours, the plan was yours, and the motive, your burning envy of Duval's success, was yours. Mademoiselle Laurent was your instrument, a young woman swayed by promises of wealth and glory. Giraud's eyes gleamed with sudden purpose. That's enough for me, Poirot. I'm taking them both into custody. The courts will sort this out. Sophie rose, trembling, as a gendarme gently took her arm. Madame Beaumont stood rigid, her gaze locked on Poirot. "You will regret this, Poirot," she said softly. "You have no proof, only theories." Poirot's voice was calm, final. "Theories, madame, become proof when the truth is laid bare. The laboratory, the financial records, the witnesses, they will speak, and Hercule Poirot's little gray cells will be vindicated." As the gendarmes led Sophie and Madame Beaumont from the room, Hastings turned to Poirot, his voice low. "You did it, Poirot. You saw through it all, the chalice, the bribe, the envy. But how did you know?" Poirot's mustache twitched, his eyes gleaming in the firelight. "The chalice, Hastings. It was too heavy, as Mademoiselle Laurent said. Her hesitation, her visit to Beaumont's estate, the crushed silver rim, these were the threads that wove the truth. The little gray cells, they never fail." The room emptied, the fire burning low, and the chateau fell silent once more. The truth of Etienne Duval's death had been revealed, but the cost of that truth hung heavy in the air, a bitter vintage in the heart of Bordeaux. Chapter 11. The Arrest. The night had fallen fully over Chateau Vigneault, cloaking the vineyards in a deep velvet darkness, broken only by the occasional flicker of starlight. Within the chateau, the grand parlor, so recently the stage for Poirot's revelations, was now quiet, its fire reduced to glowing embers. The air carried a chill, as if the very stones mourned Etienne Duval's loss. Hercule Poirot stood by the tall window, his small figure silhouetted against the night, his hands clasped behind his back. His green eyes, ever alert, reflected the faint light, while his mustache remained a perfect crescent, unmoved by the tumult of the evening. Captain Arthur Hastings sat in an armchair, his face a mixture of relief and melancholy. He toyed with a glass of water, his earlier taste for wine still dampened by the tragedy. "Poirot," he said, his voice low, "you've done it. Sophie's confession, Beaumont's involvement, it's all so clear now. But it's a grim business, isn't it? A young woman manipulated, a man dead, all for envy and ambition." Poirot turned from the window, his expression serene, yet tinged with sorrow. "Oui, mon ami, it is a tragedy of the human heart. Envy and ambition, they are poisons as deadly as cyanide, and they have claimed more than one victim this night. But the truth, it has been served, and justice will follow." Inspector Giraud entered the parlor, his coat still rumpled from the day's exertions, his face a mask of grudging satisfaction. Behind him, 2 gendarmes stood ready, their expressions stern. "Poirot," Giraud said, his tone less abrasive than usual. "You were right. About the chalice, I'll give you that. We've taken Mademoiselle Laurent and Madame Beaumont into custody. The girl's still sobbing, but she's given a full statement, confirms everything you said. Beaumont's silent as a tomb, though, not a word since we left the parlor." Poirot inclined his head, his voice calm but firm. "Madame Beaumont's silence, Inspector, is her shield, but it will not hold. The evidence, the cyanide residue, Mademoiselle Laurent's testimony, the financial records you will surely find, will speak louder than her denials. Have you searched her estate yet?" Giraud nodded, wiping his brow with a handkerchief. "My men are there now. If there's a trace of cyanide or any record of payment to Laurent, we'll have it by morning. I've also sent for Duval's solicitor to review his contracts. Might be something there to tie Beaumont to a motive beyond envy." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A wise course, Inspector. And the chalice fragments? They are secure? Giraud's scowl returned, but it lacked its usual bite. Locked in the evidence room, under guard, the laboratory's report was clear. Cyanide, applied as a thin coating, just as you said. You've got a nose for this, Poirot, I'll admit it, but don't let it go to your head. Poirot's smile was faint, almost imperceptible. The head, Inspector, is where the little gray cells reside, and they seek only justice, not glory. Mademoiselle Laurent, she is young, swayed by promises of wealth. Madame Beaumont, her envy was the spark that lit this fire. Together, they wove a deadly tapestry. Hastings leaned forward, his voice earnest. But Sophie, Poirot, she didn't mean to kill him, did she? She thought it was a harmless powder. Can the courts see that? Poirot's gaze softened, but his tone remained steady. The courts, mon ami, will weigh her intent against her actions. She applied the poison. She broke the chalice to conceal it. Yet her remorse, it is genuine. Perhaps it will temper justice with mercy. Madame Beaumont, however, her heart is colder, her motive darker. She will face the full weight of her crime. Giraud shifted, his impatience returning. Enough talk. I've got paperwork to file and a report to send to Bordeaux. You've done your part, Poirot. Leave the rest to us. Poirot bowed slightly, his manner unruffled. Of course, Inspector. But permit me one final request. To see Mademoiselle Laurent before she is taken to the station. A word of comfort, perhaps, for a soul in distress. Giraud hesitated, then shrugged. Fine, but make it quick. She's in the servants' hall, under guard. Poirot and Hastings made their way to the servants' hall, a narrow room lit by a single chandelier. Sophie sat at a worn table, her hands cuffed, her auburn hair falling in disarray. A gendarme stood nearby, his expression impassive. Her eyes, red and swollen, lifted as Poirot entered, and a fresh wave of tears spilled forth. Monsieur Poirot, she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't want this. I thought it would just make him ill. Madame Beaumont, she promised me so much, and I was weak. I'm so sorry. Poirot's tone was gentle, almost paternal. Mademoiselle, the heart is frail, and ambition can blind. You have confessed, and that is a step toward redemption. Tell the truth to the courts, and trust that justice will see your regret. Sophie nodded, her sobs quieting. Thank you, monsieur. I don't deserve your kindness. As they left the hall, Hastings shook his head, his voice heavy. Poor girl, Poirot, caught in Beaumont's web. It's a rotten shame. Poirot's gaze was distant, fixed on the corridor ahead. A shame, oui, but also a lesson. The human heart, it craves more than it can hold, and in its craving, it destroys. Madame Beaumont's envy, Sophie's ambition, they are the true poisons here. Outside, the gendarme's wagon stood ready, its lanterns casting a dim glow. Sophie and Madame Beaumont were led out, the former trembling, the latter erect and silent, her face a mask of defiance. As the wagon rattled away into the night, Giraud turned to Poirot, his voice gruff but sincere. You've got a knack, Poirot. I'll give you that. This case would have stumped me without your little gray cells. Poirot's smile was serene. The little gray cells, Inspector, they serve the truth, and the truth serves justice. Now, let us leave this place to mourn its master. The chateau's clocks struck 10, their chimes echoing through the silent halls. The arrest of Sophie Laurent and Claire Beaumont marked the end of a chapter, but the shadow of the Ebony Chalice lingered, a reminder of the cost of envy and betrayal. Chapter 12. The Last Glass. The stars glittered above the vineyards of Chateau Vigneault, their cold light a stark contrast to the warm glow of the terrace lanterns. The night was still, the air heavy with the scent of earth and ripening grapes, as if the land itself sought to reclaim the serenity disrupted by murder. Hercule Poirot sat at a small wrought-iron table on the terrace, a delicate cup of tisane before him, its steam curling into the cool evening. His black suit remained pristine, his mustache a perfect crescent, but his green eyes held a quiet melancholy, as if the weight of the case lingered in his thoughts. Beside him, Captain Arthur Hastings leaned back in his chair, a bottle of Chateau Vigneault's claret on the table, its cork untouched, a silent tribute to the fallen vintner. "Poirot," Hastings said, his voice soft with reflection. "It's over, isn't it? Sophie and Beaumont in custody, the truth laid bare. But it feels hollow, somehow. Duval's gone, and for what? A rival's envy, a young woman's ambition. It's a bitter end." Poirot's fingers traced the rim of his cup, his gaze fixed on the distant vineyards. "Oui, mon ami, it is. A tragedy of the human soul. Etienne Duval poured his life into his vines, his legacy into that ebony chalice, only to have it turned against him. Envy and greed, they are poisons that corrupt more than the body. Yet the truth, it has been served, and that is our solace." Hastings glanced at the claret bottle, its label catching the lantern's glow. "Will you try it, Poirot? Duval's masterpiece, they called it. Seems a shame to let it sit there." Poirot's lips curved in a faint smile, his eyes twinkling with a hint of mischief. "Non, Hastings. Tonight, I prefer the clarity of a tisane. Wine, it is for celebration, and this night is for reflection. The little gray cells, they have earned their rest, and I would not cloud them with even the finest vintage." They sat in companionable silence, the chateau behind them quiet, its halls emptied of guests and gendarmes. Inspector Giraud had departed for Bordeaux, his report filed, his grudging respect for Poirot left unspoken, but evident in his parting nod. The servants, led by Monsieur Renaud, moved softly through the chateau, preparing to mourn their master in their own way. The Ebony Chalice, its fragments now evidence in a police vault, had told its final tale, and the truth of Duval's death had been laid bare. Hastings shifted, his voice hesitant. "Do you think Sophie will find mercy, Poirot? She was manipulated, wasn't she? Beaumont's the real villain here." Poirot's gaze softened, but his tone remained steady. "Mademoiselle Laurent, she was a pawn in Madame Beaumont's game, swayed by promises of wealth and glory. Her remorse, it is genuine, and the courts may see it. But she chose to act, to coat the chalice with poison, to break it in panic. Justice will weigh her heart against her deeds. Madame Beaumont, her envy was the spark, her cunning the flame. She will face the consequences of her malice." Hastings shook his head, his eyes on the stars. "It's a rotten business, Poirot. All this beauty, the vines, the chateau, and yet such darkness beneath it." Poirot nodded, his fingers steepling. "The human heart, mon ami. It is like a vineyard. It can yield beauty or bitterness, depending on how it is tended. Duval's heart was for his craft, but others sought to prune it for their gain. The little gray cells, they see this, and they mourn, but they also triumph in the truth." The chateau's clocks struck 11, their chimes resonating through the night, a solemn farewell to the day's turmoil. Poirot rose, his movements precise, and took a final sip of his tisane. "Come, Hastings. The night grows late, and tomorrow we return to the world beyond these vines. The case of the Ebony Chalice is closed, and Hercule Poirot is content. Hastings stood, casting a last glance at the claret bottle. A shame about the wine, though. Duval would have wanted it tasted, wouldn't he? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Perhaps, mon ami, but some legacies are best left to memory, not to the glass. Let us leave Chateau Vigneault to its peace. They walked back into the chateau, the terrace lanterns flickering behind them, the vineyards stretching into the darkness. The mystery of the Ebony Chalice had been solved, its shards revealing a tale of envy, betrayal, and redemption. Under the Bordeaux stars, Hercule Poirot and Arthur Hastings left the chateau behind, their steps light with the knowledge that justice, however bitter, had prevailed.